The whole crazy thing blew up at a fancy birthday party that, as usual, I was late for. Not my fault, though. I worked as a business consultant, which meant I was always traveling across the country. Of course, this came with some great perks like a high salary, a nice company car, and a beautiful house in a fancy neighborhood near my office. But the downside was being away from home for long periods. Sometimes I wouldn't see my wife, Wendy, or the kids for weeks, and I often arrived late to family gatherings and parties, sometimes straight from the airport, leaving my wife to attend alone until I could join her. That's exactly what happened on that Friday night in early November. Our neighbor Tom was throwing a birthday party and had invited the whole neighborhood and his coworkers. Wendy and Misty, Tom's wife, were good friends, so skipping the party wasn't an option. There must have been around 70 people there, but luckily, their house was big enough to accommodate everyone comfortably. Small houses weren't common in our neighborhood. The party started around 7, but I couldn't make it until after 10. My flight from Boston got delayed, so I decided to drop off my things at home before finding Wendy. The party was spread throughout the entire house kitchen, living room, media room, dining area, and even the backyard. I knew this because I had just finished a thorough search, looking in every corner for my wife. I knew she wouldn't hold back. She had left the kids with her mother, which meant she could finally enjoy some drinks without worrying about feeling terrible the next day. I was a bit concerned because alcohol could make her lose her inhibitions and sense of responsibility. Plus, she loved the attention she got from her friends' husbands and liked wearing revealing dresses that showed off her figure. I also worried about things getting out of hand if there was dancing involved. As I walked among the guests in search of Wendy, I couldn't help but wonder if I had arrived a bit too late. Alcohol was flowing, people were hanging around under the mistletoe, and flirting seemed to be happening more than usual. Finally, during my second round, I found my beautiful blonde wife sitting alone in a corner with a smile on her face, observing the lively atmosphere around her. All my worries disappeared in that moment. She looked absolutely stunning in her black outfit that highlighted her curvy figure. Wendy had gained a few pounds, but they suited her well and made her even more beautiful. That dress might have been a bit short, and the cleavage generous, but it worked for her. I approached her quietly and wrapped my arm around her. "Having fun without your husband," I teased her. "Don't be silly," she smiled. I had to stop drinking because I was getting drunk. Her smile filled me with joy. She looked ravishing. As I leaned in to hug her, I suddenly noticed a foul smell on her body. It was disgusting. "What's wrong, Wendy?" I asked, shocked. She looked at me confused. "What do you mean?" I got closer to her, and she smiled, ready for a hug. I took a deep breath through my nose. Oh no, it was true. "Who have you been with?" I asked, my voice firm. What she hesitated, unable to hide her guilt. I grabbed her arm and guided her towards the exit, carefully maneuvering through the guests until we were outside, away from the party. "Stop," John, Wendy whined as I reached for the front door. "You're hurting me." "I can't leave like this suddenly." I heard laughter coming from the study next to the entrance hall. It was Tom and some of his coworkers, joking around and having a great time. They didn't notice us standing at the entrance. I turned to Wendy and, for the second time in just a few minutes, saw guilt written all over her face. When she saw me, she looked away, clearly ashamed. "Oh, Wendy," I said, my voice full of disappointment, and I walked away from that party. As I stepped out onto the street and headed home, which was just a short distance away, I could hear Wendy's footsteps behind me. "Wait, John. I don't have my bag or coat," she screamed, trying to catch up to me. "Go back and get them." "I don't care," I replied, determined to continue walking. "Please, John," she begged. "Just give me a moment if you want to stay here and keep flirting." "Go ahead," I said, without even looking back. "You know I can't tolerate cheating." "We're done." "Stop, John. You're scaring me." I stopped and turned around, filled with anger and contempt. "I'm scaring you?" I asked, unable to believe it. "You should have thought about that before you decided to do that with him." "Tom's not a bad person," she whimpered, pausing to catch her breath. "He's your friend." Her words hit me like a punch. Unbelievable. "No, he's not," I replied. "He's the guy you cheated on me with." "Please, John, I never cheated on you," she begged. "You know I would never do that." "Seriously," I shouted at her foolish denial. "Tell me, how did he enjoy spending time with you?" Pain filled her eyes, but I couldn't find any sympathy for the liar who had destroyed our marriage. I turned and continued walking home, leaving her there, crying alone at the doorstep of the house where she had committed her ultimate betrayal. At least 3 hours passed before Wendy finally came home. Considering what had happened, I wouldn't have been surprised if she had spent the night at Misty and Tom's, which would have been ironic. At that moment, I found the thought somewhat amusing, even though my sense of humor was distorted. I was drunk, very drunk. With no better plan, I had decided to stay in the kitchen and indulge in a special 30-year-old Scotch whiskey that I had been saving. When Wendy arrived home and entered the kitchen, disheveled and holding her handbag, wearing that revealing outfit, I couldn't help but think she still looked attractive, like a classy lady after a wild night. But then, a wave of shame washed over me. Despite her mistakes and my anger, she was the mother of my children and deserved respect. So even in my drunken state, I tried to be civil. "Where have you been?" I managed to slur, surprised by how intoxicated I was. I didn't realize I had drunk so much. "Are you drunk?" Wendy looked at me, equally surprised. Her tone showed no sign of reproach. Well, given the situation and with no better plan, turning to alcohol seemed like the only solution. I replied, attributing my drunkenness to the night's events. "I understand," she said, calmly taking a seat in front of me. "Can you pour me a drink too?" "Take mine," I offered her my glass. "I think I've had enough." Honestly, I couldn't get up and pour a drink for her in my state. "You won't believe it," she said, looking slightly amused. "The police brought me home." "Damn, Wendy," I reacted, alarmed. "What did you do after I left?" "Nothing," she replied, surprisingly composed. "Just like I told you, I went back to get my things, but I didn't want anyone to see me in that condition. So I decided to go for a walk to clear my head." "And how does that walk end with the police bringing you home?" "I don't know. I guess I lost track of time," she replied, as if trying to explain to herself what had happened. Anyway, I don't know how long I had been walking when I realized I was completely lost. I was about to pick up my phone to see if I could use the GPS when a patrol car pulled up beside me. Wendy averted her gaze and remained silent for a moment. Suddenly, all that calm and tranquility seemed to evaporate like morning dew. When she finally looked back at me, I could see her eyes welling up with tears. I think they mistook me for one who had probably just been in one of those huge mansions. "And John," she added, adopting the typical expression of pain before breaking into tears, "I think maybe they weren't entirely wrong." I don't know if it was the result of the alcohol I had consumed or how much I cared about my wife, but at that moment, seeing her there, defenseless, crying inconsolably, I couldn't help but feel a deep and sincere sympathy for her. But all that understanding disappeared as soon as she regained her composure. "John, really," she said, trying to make me understand, "it was just a mistake, I yelled at her. "You think I'm going to believe that?" "I didn't do anything wrong," she insisted. "I never would. I wouldn't break your trust. I couldn't then go and do it again. I was out of my mind. I really don't care. Be a friend to him, you disloyal person." "Why do you keep saying you don't care? When you're so angry, I don't care what you do anymore," I answered, trying to regain composure. "You destroyed our marriage when you broke your promises. It was just a mistake." She cried. "You know I've had relationships before, and they meant nothing. This is the same. It means nothing, do I?" "You sure?" I asked, completely confused. "Do I know about your past, you would?" She responded angrily. "If you had ever taken an interest in my life before we met." With that, she had caught me. She was right on that point. I had never wanted to learn about her past. The thought of her with other people, even before we met, was something I couldn't bear to think about. Still, the idea of her being with multiple partners far exceeded even my worst expectations. It was something I certainly wasn't prepared for. Damn, I even thought I was the first one she had been with. Silly me. I realized how wrong I had been by ignoring reality, the reality that was right there, furiously hitting me in the face. I took a deep breath, determined never to make the same mistake again. "I thought you were inexperienced when we started dating," I said firmly, looking her directly in the face, hurt by her confession. "And I was," she said with a kind smile. "I had been in serious relationships, but I didn't get close with any of them, obviously." At this point, I couldn't believe anything she told me. I thought she was joking again. "Yeah, right, you can trust me on that," she confirmed. I didn't get close with any of those guys. I doubted that I could believe her, but I decided to listen. Why didn't get close with your serious boyfriends? I asked, without trying to hide my disbelief. Did you know that Alice got pregnant when she was in high school? Alice was my sister-in-law, 5 years older than Wendy. That's news to me, I replied, completely surprised. That was really difficult for the whole family. My parents, and especially Alice, went through a really tough time. Wendy seemed completely sober now. If she had been drunk that night, she had completely sobered up. It was a very challenging experience for everyone, she continued, to the point that I, myself, decided I would never be intimate. At least not outside of marriage. Wow, I exclaimed, skeptically. The serious boyfriends you had after that must have had a really hard time. Well, she shyly smiled at me, seeking some understanding. You know better than anyone that I have other talents. I smiled back at her. Obviously, I didn't have a problem with that as long as all that pleasure was mine. Wait a minute, I said, trying to keep up despite being a little drunk. You've mentioned multiple experiences, but I guess you didn't have multiple boyfriends. Well, you know how things go, especially when you're young, she replied, apparently not too interested in talking about it further. Tell me, I insisted. I don't know. She got up to go to the sink and pour herself a glass of water. I guess it all started during my freshman year in college. As she walked past me, I couldn't help but notice her swaying gracefully in her high heels. Still slightly under the influence and upset as I was, I couldn't deny that my wife exuded sensuality from every inch of her being. At the sink, she reached up to grab a glass from the top shelf. With the glass filled with water, she turned to me, leaned back against the sink, and rested her free hand on the counter. I had never been with a guy before, and I was very curious, especially about everything related to intimacy, since I was determined not to have intimate with anyone. She averted her thoughtful gaze and took a small sip of water. She smiled, still lost in thought. I remember at the end of my first date, we were sitting in the guy's car and I was worried that he would be too shy to even hug me goodnight. She looked back at me, her smile widening. So, I decided to take the initiative and asked him if he wanted me to do something for him. I smiled back at her. No way, I said, genuinely interested. Don't get me wrong. I was extremely nervous, she answered playfully. I tried to touch him, but it was impossible in the cramped front seat of that darn car. We locked eyes, our smiles remaining. For a brief moment, it felt like nothing had gone wrong that night, as if everything was normal, as it should be. Damn it. How did we end up here? As if she could read my thoughts, she approached me. Do you want some water? She asked, standing in front of me and bringing her glass to my lips. I looked up and nodded, captivated by her alluring gaze, and took a small sip of water while she gently ran her fingers through my hair. We had a great time together. I woke up the next day with the midday sun beaming right in my face. Neither Wendy nor I had bothered to close the curtains last night. One couldn't blame us, given the situation. I glanced at her beside me. She looked more passed out than asleep, but I wasn't in much better shape. Whoever claims whiskey doesn't give you a hangover is just spinning tales. After a quick shower, I headed to the kitchen in search of coffee. The anger from the previous night had given way to deep confusion. I didn't know what to do or what to think. Wendy had recognized her mistake, and she had also expressed her unwavering love for me, something I had never questioned, indeed. Plus, there were the kids. Was I about to lose my home, my children, and my family due to a stupid mistake, perhaps made under the influence of alcohol? I felt betrayed and hurt, though. The trust upon which our relationship had been built was seriously damaged, perhaps irreparably. In any case, I needed time alone to reflect. That's when I spotted the shopping list on the fridge. Normally, we did our shopping online, but given the circumstances, I thought it might be a good idea to leave the house and spend the day at the mall. I took the shopping list from the fridge and left a note for Wendy. I'd be out all day, and I'd take care of the shopping. The day at the mall was as uneventful and dull as I had hoped for. I arrived home after 6. I unloaded the groceries, filled the fridge, and finally, after changing my clothes and putting on something comfortable, I lay down on the couch, in front of the television beside Wendy. She was reclined on her side, half drowsy, watching a National Geographic documentary without paying much attention. Clad in just a long t-shirt and short socks, I savored a moment as I admired the delicacy of her bare legs, as well as the generous curve of her hips. The allure of her petite figure was unmistakable, even in the dimly lit room, barely illuminated only by the soft glow of the television. I asked my mother if she could stay with the kids until tomorrow, she whispered, unaware of my thoughts. She said it's no problem, cool, was all I could think to say. We had a lot to talk about, and for that, we needed to be alone. By the way, Misty called this afternoon, she said, turning towards me. She wanted to know if everything was okay and why we left without saying goodbye, and what did you tell her, I asked, genuinely interested in how Wendy had handled the situation with her friend. I told her that when you arrived I wasn't feeling well, she explained, as she sat up and drew closer to me, that I had drunk too much, and I asked you to take me home. Good response, I said, sincerely pleased, trying to convey my support. Have you eaten? No, I didn't have an appetite, she replied, as she snuggled in my lap. I missed you, I needed to think, I said, wrapping my arm around her. I needed to clarify my thoughts and have you, she asked, pleading. I need time to reflect, I responded, seeking to be honest. I know I messed up, she sobbed, hugging herself to my chest. You have no idea how sorry I am. I know, I said, trying to comfort her. You know I love you, right, she asked, looking up. Yes, I know, I smiled. I love you, too, even after everything I told you yesterday, she asked, returning the smile. What do you mean, I asked, teasing. You already know, silly, she responded, giving me an affectionate tap on the chest. Well, I replied. I have to admit I was quite surprised. I remained silent for a moment, hoping she would ask me why, but she didn't. You have to admit you mentioned some quite impressive figures. I told you, it's not such a big deal after all, she replied, without taking her eyes off the TV. I'm curious, I said, as she lay peacefully. What happened next with that person? What person? She asked evasively, not really paying attention. You know, the person you told me about yesterday, I replied, with amusement. The one with the significant intimacy on your first date. I never saw them again, she answered, curtly. How so? Asking her. Well, I went on other dates, she smiled. You know, with other people. How did it go with those other people? I asked, amused. Did you ask them the same question again? I went on dates with 3 other people that first week, she answered. And yes, I asked the question as to whether they wanted to engage, and that worked with every person you dated, I asked. Yes, she said. It worked with every person I dated and a bunch of other people, too. You know, people really enjoy that kind of love. I'm convinced they loved it, I said. Oh, yeah, they loved it, she said, trying to catch her breath. And what about your serious partners? I asked. What about them? She managed to ask. Do you expect me to believe that they were satisfied with just that every now and then? I asked. Oh my gosh, she said. Oh hey, I told you. I always just spent time with them. I noticed that she hesitated for a few moments. Unless they wanted to do something else, there it was. I want you to tell me, I demanded. Well, since they knew they couldn't do something else with me, they would find other ways. She loved it when I experienced love, and we could play with the aftermath, making it a fun experience. And yet, I knew she was still hiding something. So, not entirely satisfied with her response, I did something I hadn't done in the many years I had been committed to her. John, she exclaimed. That was all I asked. Well, she tried to answer, catching her breath, as far as I can remember. They sometimes could even try. You know, no, I don't, I said. What did they try? You know, she hesitated. Did they succeed? I slowly asked her. She didn't respond immediately, still trying to catch her breath. Did they? I insisted. Yes, she replied with a sigh, her voice almost inaudible. Did you enjoy it? I noticed her response. Oh my gosh, she said. Tell me, I insisted. Did you enjoy it? Yes, she gasped for air. You have never let me, I said. Oh. Honey, more than an answer, that sounded like a plea. You've never asked. For it, what would you say if I asked you now, honey? I love you, she responded, without answering my question. Fully aware of where this was leading, she took a moment before responding. It was obvious that after what had happened, after her betrayal, she was in no position to deny me anything. When was the last time? I asked. She hesitated for a moment. Honey, we don't have to. She let out a small cry. Okay. Just a year ago, at his birthday party, she finally confessed. Jesus, Wendy, I was there. You shouldn't have done that. How could you? I told you. I didn't cheat. She turned her head slightly to meet my gaze. I never had any inappropriate contact with him, never let him touch you. I was getting angry all over again. I must have seen someone else dancing with Tom, not my own wife. It felt like I had married a stranger. That's different, John. I was drunk and it was just dancing. I already apologized for that. By the way, Misty thought it looked like you were fooling around on the dance floor. You both seemed to enjoy it. It's not my fault that men get excited. I can't control that, she snapped. Why are we talking about this now? I can't help but wonder if you were unfaithful to me. I didn't cheat on you. I've already told you, I was drunk, she said. How did it happen? I managed to ask. It was late, you were angry. Now I understand why, and you decided it was time to leave. She paused to catch her breath as she continued. When I went upstairs to get our coats, she closed her eyes. Tom followed me and revealed his desire. Go on, I said with excitement. She took a deep breath before continuing. He told me how Misty had mentioned that. I enjoy such moments. He also explained that he had never experienced such good time. And I believed him. Ooh, honey, because Misty doesn't like him. Keep going, I urged her. Anyway, I felt sorry for him. We are friends, after all. So it didn't seem like such a big deal. Just a few minutes, and I could fulfill his wish. Best gift ever. I thought, I'm sorry, but honey, that was all I needed to lose all self-restraint. What else? I managed to ask through heavy breaths. Oh, honey, I told you. It was just simple then. And only yesterday this newfound openness extended to discussing what had happened the night before. Honey. Oh, hey. That's all it was. Just a quick encounter. A friendly gesture, just a quick encounter, I asked, lost in the moment. Yes, just a quick encounter. I'm so sorry. Honey, did he enjoy it? Oh yes, ... Did you betray me? I already told you. I didn't betray you, honey, she said. I didn't let them touch me. I never engaged in any act. I couldn't hold back any longer. Finally, I collapsed. How many? I asked softly, trying to regain my breath. How many? What? She responded, confused, struggling to breathe. You mentioned them, I said. How many encounters did you have last night? Honey, she hesitated for a moment. I don't know. You don't know at this point. My wife's ability to confuse me seemed limitless. Honey, you have to understand. Ah, she cried out. I wasn't willing to entertain any more excuses. How many? I asked again. All of them, she finally admitted, giving in to my persistence. Oh my goodness, I said in utter disbelief. All of them? That's not even a number. Did you lose count? 4, maybe 5? I don't know. Tom and his friends from work. She seemed scared. I can ask him if you want. Completely astonished, I didn't know how to respond. We didn't plan it, she continued, attempting to explain the inexplicable. Things just unfolded that way. Things just unfolded that way. Instead of calming me down, her explanations only deepened my astonishment. How did things unfold in such a way that my beloved wife ended up with 4 or 5 encounters last night? I honestly don't know. I'm sorry, she said, her apologies sounding sincere despite the strangeness of it all. Honestly, one thing led to another. Damn it, Wendy, I exclaimed, more hurt than angry. How is that even possible? How did one thing lead to another? I've told you. I don't know. I guess I got tired of spending time with the girls. The words tumbled out of her mouth. All they talk about is their kids, their illnesses, their pediatricians. And it gets really boring, especially when you're not there to lighten the mood. I even thought about leaving, but I decided to wait for you. So I had a couple of drinks, then a few more, you know. And then I asked, trying not to sound irritated, urging her to explain everything that had occurred. I wanted to know. I noticed Tom and his friends through a window in the lounge. They were outside, smoking and laughing. They seemed to be having so much fun, so I went out to see what was going on. That was so amusing. But when I got to the backyard, they weren't there anymore. They had moved to the pool area in the back where no one could see them. As I approached, I understood why. They were smoking marijuana anyway. She continued, my presence didn't seem to bother them. Tom and the others turned to me with smiles, approving glances. You seemed to enjoy being noticed, didn't you? I guess I enjoyed the attention as I walked past everyone to greet Tom on his birthday. We hadn't met yet, and I hadn't been able to send him my best wishes. And how did you greet him? I asked, feeling a bit jealous. Well, actually, he asked for a hug to celebrate his birthday, and you hugged him, yes. I hugged him, but she hesitated for a moment. Tell me, I demanded. Sweetie, my plan was to give him a simple hug, she said apologetically, but at the last moment, he turned and hugged me in front of all his friends. I was pretty drunk, so with the drinking and all the fun, I decided to go along with it. What do you mean? You played along well. I originally meant for it to be a simple hug, but it ended up being a mess. Did you hug Tom? Yes. I did, funny as it may sound. My wife sharing such an act with Tom almost hurt me as much as her giving him a good time. What happened next while we were hugging? Everyone was making fun of us, but you didn't get mad at them for that, I pointed out, knowing her response. No, I didn't, she replied, embarrassed. On the contrary, you went along with it, right? Still lying beneath me. I saw her nod. Tell me, how did you go along with it? Well, one of them, a big guy, offered me some of his joint. She paused for a moment. Normally I would have declined, but since I was pretty drunk, I thought it was cool. What happened next? Nothing much. We spent a while drinking, joking, and laughing until she hesitated once again, debating whether to tell me what happened next. What? Well, Tom came up with an idea. She paused again. He told me that it was unfair of me to have not wished Frank a happy birthday too. Who is Frank? I asked, irritated. Tom not only took advantage of my wife, but he also decided to share her with his friends. Frank was the big guy who offered me his joint at first. Anyway, everyone started yelling and hoping I would give Frank a hug, just like I did with Tom. Did you? Honey, I know it would have been better to refuse, but I was drunk and a little high, so at that moment, I didn't think anything of it. I went over to Frank and hugged him, but that wasn't all I needed to know. No, it wasn't. She looked close to tears. He pulled me closer, hugged me again, so everyone went crazy, including Tom. Honey, she continued. I was really shocked by everything that was happening. I could even feel his excitement while we were hugging. Were you having a good time? I asked, curious about how my wife felt in such a situation. She hesitated for a moment and did not answer the question. Were you? I asked again. Yes, I was, she finally admitted. Was it that big guy who you had fun with the most? Yes, I guess so, but I'm not entirely sure. She seemed really embarrassed. She turned to face me, her eyes fixed on mine with an intense gaze. Oh my gosh, she sighed. But Frank wasn't the only one who you spent time with, right? I asked. Well, she said, in some way or another, they all claimed to have birthdays or upcoming birthdays. Are you telling me you hugged all of them? I asked. Yes, honey. I'm sorry. But what else could I do? They all had birthdays to celebrate. Keep going, I told her. Before I knew it, I had hugged all of them. Honey. Anyway, they all wanted to hug me. So they passed me from one to the next. Until she hesitated for a moment, aware of the seriousness of her words. What? I asked anxiously. Oh, it was Tom's turn again, she finally said. He hugged me passionately and I'm so sorry, honey. My wife's confession about hugging another man sent me into a frenzy. Keep going, I ordered her. I did, she replied. Holy cow, I had never felt such rage before. I didn't know how to respond or how to process everything she had revealed in the heat of the moment. So I remained silent, in a state of complete shock. I love you, honey, I heard her say as she continued to pant. I love you too, I managed to reply, barely holding on to consciousness. After that night, I spent weeks in a state of confusion, trying to make sense of my wife's confessions and decide what to do. To make matters worse, Wendy claimed that it had all been part of a play between us. According to her, that's all it was. Honey, she had said, sounding condescending. Did you seriously think I would do something like that? The truth was, none of it made sense. But one thing was certain. She definitely spent time with someone, rather spent a really good time. As for everything else, who knows? No clue whatsoever. So, my mind went on autopilot for the next few weeks, seeking refuge in the day-to-day routine. Even my romantic life with Wendy became oddly routine, dull, and if not happening often, sometimes non-existent. Weeks went by until the new year arrived. Tom and Misty, as they always did, invited us to their New Year's party, completely unaware of the doubts that had haunted our marriage. Wendy mentioned that we could decline the invitation, but that might raise some eyebrows and lead to some nosy questions. Since I wasn't ready to handle that kind of scrutiny just yet, I figured there was no harm in going to that darn party. After all, It was hard for me to imagine that the exceptional circumstances that had occurred during Tom's birthday could happen again. Before I knew it, there I was once again in that damned house at another darn party, with a bunch of people scattered everywhere just as they had been only a few weeks before. I could tell that both Wendy and I were initially quite uncomfortable in that situation, but alcohol was invented for something, right? So that, among other things, husbands like me who felt left out could enjoy parties like that, socializing quietly with the people who just a few weeks before had probably been nice enough to spend time with their spouses. As time went by, I watched Wendy, fueled by drink after drink, shake off any prior discomfort to revert to her usual self, basking in the attention from all those guys. But despite the smiles, flirting, and shared looks, it was clear that my presence there was a nuisance, both to them and, especially, to her. Given the situation, I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't made it to that darn party. With that thought, a nasty idea crossed my mind. "Darling," I said, gently guiding her away from the guy who had his arm around her waist, with evident annoyance on his part. "Do you mind if I talk to my wife for a moment?" I asked him in a bad temper. "No, of course not," he replied, surprised, raising his hands in a no-problem gesture. "Honey, this is Dave," Tom's partner, said my wife, making the appropriate introductions and trying to downplay the whole thing. "What's up?" she asked, taking my arm to move me aside. "The home alarm on my phone went off," I lied. "The security company called, and they need me to check it. It'll only take a moment. No more than half an hour. I guess all right. Don't be too long," she responded, wrapping her arms around my neck and giving me a deep hug. I didn't even have to leave the party. Upon reaching the entrance, I headed to the study adjacent to the foyer. From there, I could have a direct view of the living room where Wendy was. With the distance and so many people in between, it wouldn't be difficult at all to follow her steps without being noticed. I could easily spot her right where I had just left her. She appeared to be joking with one of the catering waiters while he picked up her empty glass. Absorbed in my own thoughts, I had not noticed how amazing my wife looked that night. She wore a short, strapless, black tube dress, which combined with her high heels and thigh-high stockings only accentuated her beautiful figure. The careful application of her makeup, with dark eyes and bold lipstick, intensified her captivating gaze and highlighted the fullness of her lips. Her blonde hair, styled in loose, tousled waves, fell gracefully around her shoulders, adding an irresistible, effortless allure to her overall beauty. The complete package seemed to exude confidence and appeal. My thoughts were interrupted by a waiter who politely asked me for my empty glass as he passed by. With both hands free, I moved to a corner so I could write Wendy a message. At home, waiting for them to call. Might take a little longer than I thought. I saw that she was on the line. "Too bad. This is dead without you, didn't tell you. You look amazing tonight, thank you, darling. Have to go. Misty and the girls are calling for me. Don't be long. Love you." As I stepped out of the corner to check on Wendy again, I realized she was no longer in the same place. She must have left with the girls, but they couldn't have gone too far. After a couple of minutes of fruitless searching, my gaze finally found Wendy at the back of the large main hall, standing in a corner behind one of the high tables where people left their drinks while they chatted. The spot was partially hidden by a large Christmas tree. The guy I had confronted just a moment ago, Dave, was with her. It seemed like he had his hand on her waist again, although the table, conveniently covered by a tablecloth, left me not entirely certain. There was no sign of Misty or the rest of the girls. They were talking, their faces inches apart. Wendy wore a flirtatious expression, while the guy seemed to be explaining something truly engaging and amusing. She appeared genuinely captivated and would occasionally burst into uncontrollable laughter. It seemed she was beginning to get a bit tipsy. I felt a twinge of jealousy. How long had it been since she had looked at me like that, if she ever had? But the most surprising thing was yet to come. Completely oblivious to what was going on around them, and taking advantage of his privileged position somewhat apart from the rest of the crowd, that guy did something that stunned me. He grabbed one of her hands and pulled. From a distance, I didn't have the best view, but I could see Wendy's reaction. "Oh my goodness," I thought. Just then, Tom approached them. Wendy greeted him with a warm smile as he leaned in to say something in her ear. Whatever it was must have been tremendously amusing because, despite the music and the distance between us, I could perfectly hear my wife's laughter. It was obvious that she was drunk, but at least it seemed she had let go of Dave. The three of them talked for a long while, exchanging confidences and knowing glances, their heads close together. I noticed that Tom and Dave's arms were always around her. It was all making me sick. At one point, Tom gestured with his hand to something upstairs. Wendy hesitated, checked her phone, and shook her head. Then she leaned up to say something in his ear, and I could see him nodding. Curious to see what it was all about, I took out my phone and called her. I didn't even bother to step outside. It was possible that Wendy could hear the party music through my phone, but in her intoxicated state and busy as she was, it would be hard for her to distinguish it from the background music. "How's it going?" I asked. "Boring," she replied. "Are you on your way yet?" "No, not at all," I replied, feigning a hint of frustration. "The monitoring center found some sort of malfunction, and they want to send a technician to fix it right away." While we talked, Wendy never took her eyes off Tom, who seemed to be paying attention to our conversation. "Does it have to be right now?" she asked suspiciously. "Tell them we're out." "Darling, that's precisely why they don't want to let it go," I replied promptly. "Apparently the insurance company insists on not leaving any house unprotected, especially during these holidays if no one is in them." "When do you think you'll be back there?" It was the question she had been eager to ask. "I don't know," I replied, trying to feign regret that I certainly didn't feel. "I don't think I can be there in less than an hour or two. If you want, I can send you a message when I'm on my way." "That would be great, honey." As she said that, she looked up at Tom and gave him a big smile. "I love you, honey," I told her. "I love you too, dear," she replied, ending the conversation. By the time she had put her cell phone back in her purse, another guy had joined them. They were all big guys, including my friend Tom, but this last one stood out above the others. It had to be this Frank guy. Next to him, the petite figure of my wife looked really small. Just right then, someone bumped into me from behind, spilling their drink on my suit. "I'm sorry," the guy, visibly drunk, apologized. It's okay," I told him, trying to brush it off, but the guy insisted, noticeably worried about the consequences of his mistake on my clothing. "Seriously, it's okay," I insisted, trying to put the matter to rest. After a good couple of minutes of the guy persisting in his apologies, I turned to focus my attention again on my wife, but she was no longer there. I took a few steps forward and looked around, but nothing. With my heart racing, I headed to the living room where she had been just a few minutes ago, but there was no trace of her or the guy she was with. From there, I went to the dining room, the kitchen, and finally the entrance foyer. Nothing. They had vanished. For a moment, I thought about going out to look in the backyard, but it was too cold. No way could they have gone there. Finally, I made my way to the stairs leading to the first floor. Theoretically, guests weren't supposed to go up there, but given the circumstances, I thought I could come up with any excuse if necessary, so I decided to go upstairs. I was perfectly familiar with the upstairs layout. I had been there dozens of times since my children used to play in those rooms with Tom and Misty's kids. It wasn't difficult for me to find my way. I heard noise at the end of the hallway, in one of the guest bedrooms. I headed in that direction, but the door was closed, and it would be impossible to enter without being seen. Then I remembered that this bedroom shared a bathroom with the adjoining one. Silently, I reached the shared bathroom, crossing the adjoining room in silence. It was practically in the dark, barely illuminated by the light coming from the other room, where it was clear that someone was present. I reached the door in front of me, and hidden in the darkness, I peeked, fully aware that no one could see me. I couldn't believe my eyes. I wanted to pull Wendy away from them, but it was her decision, not mine. I harbored the strange hope that eventually she would come to her senses and would pull back off of his friend, as if that could put a remedy to what was happening. Anyway, she didn't. I remained crouched in the corner of the study near the front door, from where I could see, in the distance, the stairs by which I was waiting for my wife to come down in the company of her 3 friends. It took them more than 2 hours to come back down amidst jokes and laughter, as if nothing had happened. When they arrived downstairs, my wife split from the friends to join the group of women at the back of the main hall. When I finally gathered enough courage, I made my way to the main hall. There was my wife, calmly chatting with a group of women, among whom was Mindy, Tom's wife. There was no sign of the friends. They must have gone to the backyard to boast freely about their recent activities. "Everything okay?" dear Wendy asked nonchalantly, on seeing me. She didn't give me a hug this time. "I don't know, honey," I said, pretending to have no idea. "I guess that depends." Suddenly, all those women seemed interested in my cryptic answer. "Depends on what my wife asked," suspiciously looking sideways at the rest of her friends gathered there. "You tell me," I finally replied. "What have you been doing tonight?"